I've used all of the appetite suppressants, and this by far, hands down, 100%, is the most potent one, the most effective one I've ever tried. The fat loss that I've gotten out of this last 2.5 weeks, phenomenal. Vigorous Steve here. Let's compare tesofensine versus tirzepatide. Both reasonably new appetite suppressants which are just becoming available to the general population. Both of these medications have been around for a while now. Both underwent clinical trials. One is still under investigation in the treatment of obesity, being tesofensine. And tirzepatide actually got FDA approved in diabetes type 2 management and is being investigated in weight loss management, but is not currently FDA approved for that purpose. Now, they're both getting quite popular and they're both highly expensive. Both of these compounds work through completely different mechanisms. So I wanted to compare both so you guys know which direction to go if you want to suppress your appetite with either tesofensine or tirzepatide. And, if you have a limited budget, you can basically only choose one of them because these compounds are highly expensive. Do me a solid and hit that super chat or hit that super like, because I spent $750 on the examination of both of these compounds because I had to spend $250 on tesofensine and $500 on tirzepatide to figure out a hard truth. Yes, I spent that money so you don't have to. But again, do me a solid, hit that super chat or super like, whatever it's called here on YouTube, so I can get a little bit of return of investment. And before we get into it, please like the video, leave a comment for the algorithm, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell button so you can get notified whenever a new Vigorous video drops. Before we get into my personal experience with either tesofensine or tirzepatide, let me go over the quick facts of tesofensine. Tesofensine is a serotonin, noradrenaline, or norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitor, also abbreviated to SNDRI. There's very limited drugs available which are actually SNDRI medications. Some of them are SSRIs or SNRIs or SDRIs, right? Depending on which neurotransmitter they actually block the reuptake of. Tesofensine blunts your appetite through a multitude of different pathways, one of them being through the 5-hydroxytryptophan receptors, which tesofensine modulates in a similar sense that SSRIs modulate the 5-hydroxytryptophan receptors. The primary form of appetite suppression probably comes through the activation of the 5-HT2C receptors, but tesofensine also modulates the 5-HT1A, 2A, and 2B receptors, and perhaps the 5-HT3 and 4 receptors, which help to regulate gastrointestinal motility. So again, keep in mind that tesofensine acts in a similar way to an SSRI does, and this could mean that you'll have long-lasting side effects when you're coming off tesofensine, which is what I experienced when I discontinued the fluvoxamine a couple months ago. Now, to make a long story short, one of the other pathways that tesofensine blunts your appetite is through noradrenaline and dopamine increases. So let's just make it simple without going into details how noradrenaline and dopamine act on different organs and help to regulate your appetite that way. Let's just say that noradrenaline and dopamine levels increase after the consumption of food. So if you take tesofensine and you get these serotonergic, noradrenergic, and dopaminergic effects, increasing these neurotransmitters through the entirety of the duration of the day, that means you basically always get consistent appetite suppression. And it's also considering that tesofensine has a super long half-life of over a week. 9 days, guys. 9 days, 220 hours. Tesofensine has a half-life of 9 freaking days. So that means it's going to take a while for this SNDRI effect to slowly build up. And it also means that tesofensine discontinuation is basically self-tapering. So for the guys that ever experienced coming off an SSRI or an SDRI medication or another antidepressant, where you slowly have to taper off these medications to prevent some of the side effects and withdrawal symptoms from manifesting. And again, don't do what I did with fluvoxamine discontinuation, where you stop cold turkey and get all of the side effects within as little as 4 to 5 days. I made a separate video about that. I'll link it at the end of this one. Tesofensine, luckily, is kind of self-tapering due to its long half-life. So even though I've talked to several different people that used tesofensine over the last couple of weeks now, some of which experienced similar withdrawal symptoms to SSRIs, But that's after long continuous use of tesofensine for, let's say, several months in duration. Again, I don't know where they get the money from because that's highly expensive, but some people respond quite well to tesofensine as their primary method of appetite suppression. One of the metabolites of tesofensine, NS2360, has about 6% affinity or effectivity of tesofensine itself, and that was determined in vivo, by the way. And this metabolite, NS2360, is active for 16 days or 374 hours. So even if the tesofensine is still clearing from your system, one of its active metabolites with 6% effectivity is even longer lasting. So you don't have to, well, in my opinion, you don't have to undergo a self-tapering treatment or a tapering treatment when you discontinue tesofensine because, again, it's basically self-tapering due to its very long half-life. On the subject of metabolism, tesofensine is metabolized by the cytochrome P450 3A4 enzymes, which are moderately inhibited by ciprofloxacin, grapefruit juice, one of my favorite methods to inhibit the CYP3A4 enzymes when taking oral anabolic androgenic steroids, also metabolized by the CYP3A4 enzymes. Fluvoxamine is a moderate inhibitor of the CYP3A4, and perhaps berberine, cannabidiol, milk thistle, also known as silymarin, niacin, and piperine. While, on the other hand, the inducers of the CYP3A4 enzymes are St. John's wort, modafinil, and capsaicin, so you might want to avoid eating spicy food when you're running tesofensine. Now, you might get a little bit of conflicting signals because I used to run fluvoxamine and modafinil at the same time to great extent for my neurotransmitters and my overall sense of well-being and productivity levels. But again, fluvoxamine inhibits the CYP3A4 while modafinil induces the CYP3A4. So you have to look into this metabolic pathway and see which of these compounds are actually running when introducing tesofensine to your protocol for appetite suppression, because you might get overlapping or negative effects when you're combining these compounds together. Previously, tesofensine was investigated in the treatment of Alzheimer's disease as well as Parkinson's disease, but those clinical trials have already been discontinued. Currently, it's undergoing clinical trials for obesity management. The commonly used dosages in those obesity trials range between 0.25, 0.5, even 1 milligram per day. Personally, I used 0.5 milligrams per day to help with appetite management, which was effective to a certain extent. Some of the side effects, which includes elevated heart rate, elevated blood pressure, gastrointestinal upset, which is comparable to most SSRIs when you take that at the recommended dosages. That's why usually SSRIs are slowly tapered upwards, so you don't get these serotonergic effects within the intestinal tract. Dry mouth, headache, nausea, insomnia, etc. Right? All the common side effects you would associate with either appetite suppressants or SSRIs are also present with tesofensine. Now, from my personal experience, running tesofensine for approximately 2 weeks at a dose of 0.5 milligrams per day, the initial first 3 days are, I would consider to be the most effective. So even though it has a reasonably long half-life, I got the best effect the first 3 days, after which I felt that I was getting used to tesofensine. Now, I have to warn you guys, I discontinued fluvoxamine, let's say 2 months ahead of this tesofensine experiment. And you got to keep in mind that I discontinued the fluvoxamine, this SSRI, cold turkey. So I had a boatload of side effects, which I had to slowly, grow out of just by abstinence. And it might mean that some of my 5-HT receptors are still somewhat downregulated, discombobulated, not responding in a normal method to an SNDRI, whereas normal people would respond to them, because, again, some of my receptors might not be very responsive to the medications like this. So even though in the first 3 days I got a pretty good response, it felt like I was taking a combination of a low-dose modafinil, Adderall, and Adderall XR, that's the extended release, and subitramine, for the guys that ever experimented with subitramine, which is another appetite suppressant, which is an SNRI, so serotonin noradrenaline reuptake inhibitor based appetite suppressant, which actually got discontinued, 2010, because subitramine had an increased risk for cardiovascular events. So I've experimented with phentermine and subitramine in the past, And as soon as I started with tesofensine, I got a little bit of a hint of modafinil, a hint of Adderall, and a hint of sibutramine. So I felt more cognitively inclined. Could be because tesofensine has been shown to have a little bit of effect on the cholinergic system. So you might get a nootropic-like effect from tesofensine supplementation. It felt very similar to modafinil in the sense that modafinil has some serotonergic and dopaminergic effects. So the mood was increased, the productivity was increased. I felt a little bit more driven to get my work done. And in the context of a low-dose extended release Adderall, I felt that my overall energy levels and a little bit of this, methamphetamine tingling sensations, probably coming from the increased noradrenaline concentrations that tesofensine potentiates. In a similar sense to Adderall, I felt that way on tesofensine. And sibutramine, it's been a very long time since I've used sibutramine, so all I could say is that it's very comparable in the sense that tesofensine makes you a little bit uneasy, similar to how sibutramine does that. So I would say that, from a personal experience, it's basically a combination of those three medications or drugs. But regarding appetite suppression, the first 3 days I felt a moderate appetite suppression, but after that, for the remaining 11, 12 days that I ran tesofensine, the appetite suppression was basically zero. Now, I mostly went by my appetite. So I had my diet structured, and then I wanted to see if I felt inclined to eat a little bit more at the end of the day. So I had my regular diet laid out, 0.5 milligrams tesofensine upon waking, doing all of my daily chores, my daily fasted cardio, making all my meals, going to the gym, etc., etc., etc. At the end of the day, in most cases, I was still hungry. And, besides the regular fruit bowl that I have post-workout, I felt inclined to eat a little bit more, whether that was an extra meal or perhaps some mixed nuts, maybe 100 grams, which is, of course, very calorically dense, or having the occasional 7-Eleven midnight binge run. Unfortunately, that still occurred on tesofensine. I did not experience any of the gastrointestinal upset or digestive issues that some people have. I've sat next to people running a similar dose of tesofensine for already maybe a month in duration. And then you go to a restaurant and they're, painstakingly picking the protein out of their food and leaving all the vegetables and leaving all the rice. It's like they have zero appetite. So they can't even eat. But, the inner bodybuilder tells them to eat the protein and, drink a little bit of fluid. But, it's a real struggle for them. And I sit next to them eating the same meal, but eating double the quantity and then finishing their meals also on tesofensine. So maybe it's just something uniquely to me that I could just eat, right? And I've tried modafinil, I've tried Adderall, I've tried sibutramine, and I would say those three just by themselves at a low dose are more beneficial for appetite suppression than the tesofensine for the long duration that I got from it. When I discontinued the tesofensine, I got slight withdrawal symptoms similar to discontinuing fluvoxamine, but that was certainly not as intense. So, okay, I'm going to be honest. I switched from tesofensine straight to tirzepatide. And after 2 administrations of that, I got way better appetite suppression compared to the tesofensine. So I've basically half a bottle of tesofensine lying around here. No, that's not for you to take. Maybe in the future, I will run tesofensine maybe 1 day a week because the cognitive benefits and the stimulatory benefits were actually quite pleasant. And I got that from a low dose of 0.5 milligrams within an hour of use. So I might use this as a nootropic going forward, but definitely not as an appetite suppressant. Now, that's just my personal experience. Again, I've talked to many people out there who've used tesofensine as an appetite suppressant and gotten great results out of it. Some of them ran that for weeks to months in duration and got a ton of fat loss or body weight reduction out of that. But me personally, I got exactly 0 kilograms lost. 0. So I'll leave it there, right? Let's move over to tirzepatide, which I got great experiences out of. And even though this medication is quite expensive, even more expensive than liraglutide, dulaglutide, or semaglutide, at least from the source that I got it from, I would say that it's worth it. So let's dive in, shall we? Let's start with the quick facts. Tirzepatide is available under the brand name Mounjaro, produced by Eli Lilly, but it's also available as a generic on various gray area peptide websites. Tirzepatide is a combination glucagon-like peptide-1 receptor agonist as well as a glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide receptor agonist, GIP. So Mounjaro, Tirzepatide, is the only GLP-1 and GIP receptor agonist which is currently available as a pharmaceutically approved medication. Again, in the treatment of type 2 diabetes, it's off-labelly used for appetite suppression. That's not what it's currently FDA approved for, but there are several clinical trials which Mounjaro Tirzepatide is currently being investigated for obesity management. So keep that in mind. Using this for an appetite suppressing effect is currently off-label purposes. Now again, GLP-1 receptor agonists like liraglutide, dulaglutide, or semaglutide with various half-lives are highly beneficial, highly effective. Liraglutide to this day is still one of my favorite appetite suppressants. I've used pens upon pens upon pens upon pens and spent thousands of dollars to help with appetite suppression from liraglutide at various dosages from 0.6 to 1.8 milligrams per day. I've used semaglutide several times before going on holidays at a single administration of 1 to 2 milligrams, which seems to be effective for 1 week up until 10 days, give or take, after which the effects kind of start to dissipate. The problem with semaglutide in a single dose and the problem with tirzepatide in a single dose is that you get terrible nausea and gastrointestinal upset for the first couple of days after the single administration. And then, you get to a bliss point, the beneficial effects where you have good appetite suppression, but no nausea and no gastrointestinal upset. And then slowly the appetite kind of starts to return and you get, very poor appetite management. And especially if you do this on a diet towards the end of the week when you're already getting hungry and you already start to get depleted, you're getting closer to your planned refeed or cheat meal. This is where the diet starts to get tough. So what I've noticed and what Derek More Plates, More Dates mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago on the Super Physiological Man podcast, why not dose these drugs like, a long-acting testosterone enanthate or other medications that we like to do daily micro-administrations of. Instead of doing 1 or 2 injections per week, you do maybe 3 administrations Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or daily administration. So that's what I've been doing, 1 milligram tirzepatide, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Again, now we're already going into the dosing protocol. So let's stick with the quick facts. GLP-1 and GIP are both incretin hormones. I've explained this in a multitude of different videos, so I'll just give you a quick rundown. Incretins regulate appetites, gastrointestinal digestive juice secretion, the enzymes in the digestive juices which help with digestion of food. Incretin hormones also help to regulate the rate at which partially digested food enters the intestinal tract, basically intestinal motility. They both contribute to insulin release, but it doesn't mean that when you take a GLP-1 or GIP receptor agonist that you're suddenly going to produce a ton of insulin and you're going to go hypoglycemic when you're doing this in cases of fasting, for example, where you're not really consuming any food. I've tried this many, many different times myself. Don't worry, don't do what I do, but I could tell you from firsthand experience, whether you take a GLP-1 receptor agonist or a GLP-1 GIP receptor agonist, tirzepatide, your blood glucose concentrations are not going to fall below 70 milligrams per liter. And that's in a fasted state for 4 to 5 days. I've already done that experiment, so you don't have to worry too much about super low blood glucose levels and oversecretion of insulin. GLP-1 and GIP are acting as a co-secretor when glucose enters the pancreas, after which insulin secretion is regulated. Now, estradiol also plays a regulatory role in insulin secretion, so this is how you have to look at it. When glucose enters the pancreas and GLP-1, GIP, and estradiol are present, then you get proper insulin release. And again, when these hormones are not present, you might get improper insulin release, too little or too much. GIP activation also contributes to fat mobilization. Now, there's a very good paper available for this. I'll link it down below. It's a very long paper, but I would highly advise you to read it when you're interested in tirzepatide this combination medication. Basically, long story short, when the glucose-dependent insulinotropic receptors are agonized on adipose tissue, this increases fat mobilization. That's into adipose tissue as well as out of adipose tissue. Now, it's speculated, or you can conclude from basic human biology, that insulin and glucagon play a regulatory role in this process. So when you're in a fasted state and glucagon levels are elevated, when the GIP receptors on adipose tissue are stimulated, whether that's with GIP produced endogenously or through a GIP agonist in the form of tirzepatide, then fat is mobilized out of adipose tissue. And when insulin is present, whether that's from exogenous use in the form of Lantus or Humalog, an exogenous form of insulin, or insulin being endogenously secreted by the pancreas through the activation of GLP-1 and GIP receptors and having estradiol present, all as cofactors for insulin secretion following a meal, then the GIP receptor activation on adipose tissue and insulin receptor activation on adipose tissue promotes fat storage. Now again, the data is a little bit wishy-washy. Some of this is speculation by the medical community and the other part is basic human biology. So I wanted to figure out the higher truth, and because I had tirzepatide, insulin, and glucagon available in my fridge, I ran a small experiment. I did a couple days combining tirzepatide, Mounjaro, with a long-acting insulin, activating the insulin receptors systemically. And then I did glucagon injections for a couple days, a full 1 milligram. So that's a very expensive injection for the guys that are familiar with the prices of the online sources. Not cheap to inject 1 milligram glucagon. I injected that intra or subcutaneously in the adipose tissue in one side of my lower back while also fasting. Guess what happened? I lost a ton of fat on one side of my love handles. Man, we might have found a new solution, bypassing Helios entirely, because Helios is clenbuterol and yohimbine, and that stimulates your heart rate way too much, and it feels highly unpleasant. But this, well, all you get is basically appetite suppression, and that's also highly beneficial when you're dieting. So I might have found a new solution here. I would like some of you guys to join in this experiment. Give me your feedback if that actually worked for you, because, I mean, if I feel it now, it's like an inch less on one side, and it's only a couple days of glucagon injection. Still, it will be a highly expensive experiment, but if you're able to run this experiment by yourself in a fasted state, please do so and report me your findings so I can draw a conclusive answer, because again, it's only been a couple days, and that's only my body. So keep that in mind. Now again, the prescription indication for Mounjaro use is for type 2 diabetes management. And for off-label purposes, it can be used for weight loss management, but it's currently not FDA approved for this purpose. There are several clinical trials. One of them is currently in phase 3 clinical trials for weight loss management in adults who are overweight. The SURMOUNT-1 clinical trial had an average weight loss after 72 weeks of continuous tirzepatide use was 15% at the 5 milligram dose per week, 19.5% on the 10 milligram dose per week, and 20.9% on the 15 milligrams dose per week. So after 72 weeks, people lost anywhere between 15 to 21% of their body weight. So that's a little bit over a year. If you can tolerate 15 milligrams tirzepatide per week, that's highly, highly promising. Now, from my personal experience, running 1 milligram tirzepatide Monday, Wednesday, Friday for, well, let's say 2.5 weeks up until this point, I lost almost 6 kilos. I'm missing meals, and not on purpose. It's just because I'm not hungry. I forget. I have my alarm clock on my phone ready for my supplements, which are easy to take, and even those are digesting quite a bit slower. So I might get a little bit of gastrointestinal upset when I take some supplements on an empty stomach, because the intestinal juices and the enzymes and whatever else are just not being released at a normal extent. And yes, I take my supplements with apple cider vinegar and sometimes beta hydrochloride to help with the digestion thereof and the absorption. So again, keep that in mind. When I eat food, it digests so slow that I'm not hungry at all. I'm not hungry at all. It's crazy. I've used liraglutide, I've used dulaglutide, I've used semaglutide, modafinil, Adderall, phentermine, semaglutide, etc., etc., etc. I've used all of the appetite suppressants, and this by far hands down, 100%, is the most potent one, the most effective one I've ever tried. The fat loss that I've gotten out of this last 2.5 weeks, phenomenal. And during this time, all that I did, which was the same protocol that I followed when I was running Tesofensine, all I did was daily fasted cardio, follow my diet based on my appetite. So in this case, I didn't eat anything extra and I actually missed a couple meals, forcing me to either drink a little bit of a protein shake or simply just forgetting. And I used 5-amino-1-MQ, which I've been on for the majority of February. So that's 50 milligrams in the morning, 50 milligrams in the evening. 5-amino-1-MQ helps to prevent nicotinamide breakdown or the methylation of nicotinamide. So this improves the NAD plus salvage pathway. And this way you get increased or consistent fat loss within adipose tissue. Now, I already made several videos about 5-amino-1-MQ, so I'll link them at the end of this one so you know what I'm talking about. But besides that, no clenbuterol, no ephedrine, no modafinil because I stopped that a while ago. Nothing basically to promote fat loss. So all the fat loss that I got was from the Tirzepatide and a couple days on glucagon for the localized spot injections. Best experience I've had with a drug in a very long time regarding appetite suppression, because most of the other drugs is kind of like, shaky, elevated heart rate, not feeling a little bit comfortable, some minor anxiety at certain points during the day, etc. The half-life of Tirzepatide is 5 days, so for 1 weekly administrations, it might be a little bit too short. So if you do a dose of 5 milligram on Sunday, for example, I think you're going to get, moderate to reduced appetite suppression by the end of the week. So that might force you to eat a little bit more or cheat on your diet. So from my experience, I feel that, on Derek's recommendation, every day, every other day, 3 times per week administrations of 1 milligram, more than enough. The metabolism of Tirzepatide goes through the similar pathways as the other GLP-1s and GIP medications, the other incretins. It's metabolized through the dipeptidyl peptidase type 4 enzymes, which are present on the cell membrane. Now, the DPPT enzymes, they metabolize growth factors. For example, insulin is a growth factor, IGF-1. Growth hormone, releasing hormone is a growth factor, but growth hormone itself is not considered to be a growth factor. So GHRH is metabolized by the dipeptidyl peptidase type 4 enzymes. It's a mouthful. EPO, right? Erythropoietin, epidermal growth factor. There's a whole list. I'll put it on the screen so you guys know which growth factors are metabolized by dipeptidyl peptidase type 4 enzymes, including the incretins, right? So that's Tirzepatide, liraglutide, dulaglutide, and semaglutide. You can inhibit these enzymes with gliptin medications, including sitagliptin, sexagliptin, or linagliptin. There's a whole list of these medications available. They're quite expensive, and they're also prescribed in cases of type 2 diabetes. There's no real other practical application for gliptin medications unless you have access to IGF-1. If you want to prevent the breakdown of IGF-1, LR3, DES, or Increlex, for example, then I would recommend gliptin medications to prevent the breakdown and make your IGF-1 a little bit more potent. And berberine is also said to be a potent or moderate dipeptidyl peptidase type 4 inhibitor. So I've been supplementing with berberine 500 milligrams in the morning for this entire duration. I basically supplement with berberine all the time, even though I'm on a ketogenic diet. I like berberine for its lipid management effects in combination with citrus bergamot. I feel that they work very synergistically regarding lipid management where you're drug-free or enhanced. So I'm always on that there berberine, 500 milligrams in the morning, sometimes 2 servings, 500 milligrams in the morning and 500 milligrams in the evening. But after I was doing a lot of research on mitochondrial functioning, I saw that, consistent and higher dosages of berberine might have a deleterious effect on your mitochondrial function. So I reduced that to 500 milligrams in the morning. And how much that contributes to the inhibition of tirzepatide metabolism through these dipeptidyl peptidase 4 type 4 enzymes found on the cell membrane. I'm not entirely sure, but again, berberine helps with insulin sensitivity, and the better your insulin sensitivity is, the better your glucose levels are going to be, the lower your insulin levels are going to be, and of course, insulin is potentially a cofactor in the storage of adipose tissue when GIP receptors are activated as well. So long story short, combine both for a increased effect. Now, the dosages which are recommended for type 2 diabetes management range from 2.5 to 15 milligrams once weekly. And the commonly reported side effects are similar to the other GLP-1 receptor agonists: nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, constipation, upset stomach, and potentially acid reflux. And tirzepatide might also be correlated with thyroid cancer. Now, again, when you read those studies, you see that the thyroid cancer, which was formed with continuous use on GLP-1 receptor agonists, were people suffering from type 2 diabetes or other underlying medical conditions. Personally, I'm not very worried. I've done multiple ultrasounds on my thyroid over the last couple of years, and I don't really see any changes. Again, if you're worried about thyroid cancer, feel free to do an ultrasound on your thyroid gland before, during, and after the treatment with GLP-1 receptor agonist or combination medications of GLP-1 and GIP. How it compares, if you're unfamiliar with tirzepatide, I would say that it's very similar to using semaglutide while fasting. When you fast for a multitude of different days, you get that feeling of emptiness in your stomach, and it feels flat. So it's empty, but you're not hungry, and your stomach is flat. And this feeling I have throughout the entire day. So that's also because I'm, of course, eating a lot less. Maybe it's because the rate at which my partially digested food from the stomach is entering the intestinal tract, so it's going through it slower. I feel that all of my food is digesting normally, so I don't feel that it's partially digesting. Bathroom experience are pretty much the same. No diarrhea, no vomiting, no nausea in my case. But that will be the closest analogy I can make on how to describe tirzepatide. I was researching tirzepatide on the cases of fertility, and it might actually be beneficial. In cases of female polycystic ovarian syndrome, tirzepatide can actually improve fertility parameters. That's in females. And when you look at the rodent studies, tirzepatide was shown to have no negative effects in either female or male rodents. So there might be some promise to run this in cases of a fertility protocol after coming off cycle. I will continue with tirzepatide for another month or so. So that's till the end of March. Because again, I don't see any proven negative effect on fertility levels, whether that's in men or women, and it might actually be beneficial. So I feel that tirzepatide is reasonably safe to use, even when you're working on fertility parameters. Still, the evidence is quite limited and not very conclusive, I would say, so I'm still going to take it out. I'm just going to use the tirzepatide for the next couple of weeks to get into a pretty good shape, so I prevent myself from getting a dad bod during this entire fertility protocol that I'm going to undergo for the majority of this year. I would say that it's very promising, albeit that it's very expensive. It's going to be a couple $100 for 5 milligram servings from what I see online. So keep that in mind. The amount of food that you're not going to eat, if you compare that to the price that you're going to spend on tirzepatide, I would say that it's non-comparable. But when you compare it to the time that you're not spending about thinking about food, worrying about food, being annoyed by not being able to eat, or being annoyed in general, this hungry, moody, hangry feeling that you get while dieting, it's not there. So in that sense, I'm more productive because I'm not, focused on not being able to eat. I'll leave it here. All things considering, tirzepatide wins hands down. Best appetite suppressant I've tried, ever, basically. Minimal side effects and all the results you would get. The only real side effect of tirzepatide is that it's mad expensive. Hopefully with time there'll be some generic medications out there so Eli Lilly can compete and have to forcefully reduce the price so you guys can afford it a little bit better. I think tirzepatide is going to be the norm going forward, really. That's how promising it is, especially in combination with glucagon. But please help me out in that experiment and report to me by email if you're able to do that experiment and see how your fat loss was combining these two medications together. And well, regarding the tesofensine, I guess I'm just going to use this occasionally when I need a little bit more of a stimulatory effect, similar to Adderall extended release at a dose of, let's say, 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams upon waking. That's the only real practical application I see for tesofensine, but your mileage might be different, because I have met people who got tremendous and great appetite suppression out of tesofensine. I'm just not that guy. And again, it could be the fluvoxamine messing with my 5-HT receptors for multiple months after discontinuation. So, take it with a grain of salt, I would say. The tesofensine will be in my cabinet for occasional use, and the tirzepatide will be in my fridge for, 3 times per week use until I run out at the end of March. I'll leave it here. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can find everything that I'm associated with down below in the YouTube description section. Vigorous crew, a front double bicep for you guys. You guys know what to do. You already liked, you already commented, but feel free to comment again. The more comments you leave, the better the algorithm gets stroked. And the harder you stroke the algorithm, the further we're going to get with this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.